As far as I know, the transparency of ideas. So essentially the idea is that for an idea to be held in mind, you have to be able to observe it.
Yeah.
So I would argue, if you are arguing that these ideas do exist within the mind, how come everybody can access them?
Yeah.
That's the issue. It's like, because you is from God, which is communicated through sort of revealed theology. Or is it something that is innately within us? So I feel like there's a discrepancy there.
I know. I remember Plato responded to that actually. I don't remember exactly what it was.
Sure.
But his response, he did respond to like why certain people may forget certain things, and then it comes back to them. But going just from the Islamic perspective, what Islam argues is that human beings are very forgetful. We're very, very forgetful. And actually what it is there's this thing called fitra. So there's this like innate disposition in us that there is this idea we all have that there is something greater, something bigger than us. We don't know what it is. So say for example, there's these kids, and there's been actually loads of people have been talking about this. There's been experimentation that the Oxford University did with like kids, and I think it was
are you talking about when they got the kids and they got like different colours and they associate? I'm not sure what you're talking about. They looked at the colours and certain kids associated certain colours with bad things.
No, there was loads of responses to this study as well. It was a study about if kids were left on the islands, innately something greater. So the study but I don't know if how many studies have been done.
That does seem very difficult.
But there is legitimately. Sorry, did we keep moving? Okay. So there is legitimately this study. It's a very, very, very interesting study, and it's something that classical scholars talked about a lot. There's this scholar called Ibn Tufayl, and he wrote this tale of this kid who grows up on an island away from civilization and ends up to believe in something that is bigger than, and I feel like it is almost something natural. It's like, when and the romantics of the 19th century, they really kind of, like Edmund Burke and these other guys, they really pinpoint this idea of like the sublime.
I think there's a predisposition of human beings which is, I personally think is neither here or there. There is a predisposition in human beings to potentially want to seek authority and a higher power. Although it's been quite heavily disproven, but the ideas have been developed and built upon. There's this book called Ordinary Man. This might seem like a tangent, but it's related to the point.
Sure.
Essentially, it's following this group of ordinary men in Nazi Germany who essentially ended up killing over 83,000 people.
Wow.
And essentially, they were not anti-Semitic. So essentially, these guys ended up following authority. They just ended up following an authority figure just out of it happenstance. And essentially, the author concludes that this is because of sort of a predisposition in human beings to follow some sort of authority figure under some circumstances. And I'd argue that you could go further to the human beings with a predisposition to follow authority figure wants to personify. Like if you think about the Greek pantheon, it's like human beings believed in many gods for many different things. That's a god for everyone. Like it makes sense, for example, Hades is the god of the underworld, so he can be the god of the minerals and the earth. But I would argue that doesn't necessarily prove the existence of a deity, per se. Like just because innately this concept exists within us that we want to find a higher power. It doesn't necessarily mean it exists. Like I would argue that innately, and then again I don't want to say anything exactly. Innately human beings want to, dominate and murder to some extent. So like if you idea through abstraction, we want to essentially succeed and find a conquest, right? So just because that idea exists within us innately doesn't necessarily mean, one, it's the right thing, and two, doesn't necessarily mean it's the
It depends. I remember there was a study, and I'm going to respond to what you said. So I remember there was a study about, I think it was, they were conducting a study. It was Vietnam in the Second World War. And you know, there's I don't know what the percentage was, but there's a high percentage of soldiers who actually died. Not because they were in combat, but it's because they were refusing to shoot. And they got killed themselves. And then that's where amphetamine comes in. Induced drugs. Rage.
I mean, like, very famously, there's a big controversy around the Vietnam War.
Right. And then also, there was a second point I wanted to make. But
I see your point, but I find it very difficult to see from that, because let's say you have a percentage of soldiers who are, you know, conscientious objectors, for example. I would argue, I don't know because I don't have the statistics in front of me, but just through, I don't know, inference, I'd argue that that's not a large number of, like, that is not it might be a large figure overall. But let's say, you know, but I wouldn't say that it is overall, if you're considering the whole, all of the people who died, I would say the majority of them died to be conscientious objectors, for example.
No, I don't. I just wanted to, like, pinpoint at something that maybe conquest and conquering, it's to do with, like, the geographical, like, circumstances. I wouldn't argue that it is necessarily human to pursue that way, you know. And also in terms of, like, whilst humans progress, it seems that there's less of that in the physical sense.
I think I explained myself badly. So the example of, like, conquest, and that's not your fault, it's mine. So the example of, like, conquest and stuff, you could argue that things like that are innately held, because if you consider human history, so much murder, it's really bad. So if you look at it from that perspective, right, just because it's happened a lot doesn't mean it's what is innately held within us. So if you apply that argument to, for example, God, just because lots of people believe in God doesn't mean that the idea is innately held, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure, but I cited this study to show you that perhaps it's not innately held for human beings to kill. But answering the other point that you're making about why certain. So what I say is that when I say why is it that there is this innate thing, this feeling to believe in something, it's sort of a response to sort of the meme theory, you know, that Dawkins talks about, that it's really a virus that we spread. I mean, it's not a virus. I mean, a virus is sort of an outer body. It's something that comes from outside, right? Whereas this thing seems to be very naturally, you know, like, because like the study shows, it was. And I don't really like doing this, or like there's a study of this, because there's also counter study, which I may not be aware of. But from this study, what they were doing was they isolated kids. There was isolation happening. So there's no outside influence. Why is it that human beings tend to you know, have this, like, it's not asymmetrical, but like, not horizontal, what's the other one? Vertical. Why do they have this vertical relationship with wanting to believe in something bigger? And I want to make the point was, like, you know, when you go to, like, you see this amazing mountain, and it just overwhelms you in feelings, and like this feeling of, like, the sublime, right? And how is it like? This is something that is very human. So the argument I'm trying to make is, to believe is very human. It's a very human thing. Now, whether it's something that is an illusion or I feel like needs to be proven to me first. Because I can say, well, it's very human. If you say to me, how dare you, how can you believe in a God? I say, well, it's very human to believe in something bigger. It's something that we just do, you know. Whether it's an illusion, you kind of have to prove to me. me, because I don't think it's illusion based upon what I was saying to you about the marketing plan. If there is in a particular instruction on how to live my life, and it's over and over, it's been tested and it works, then I feel like maybe this is something that I should look into, you know?
Yeah.
Versus just rejecting
I mean,
it.
that's fair enough, but to replace what so like you're kind of on this point that there is this idea of sort of believing innately. I would say that just okay,
because you might not
or belief is innately.
Yeah.
But could you not infer from that if God is the greatest, it's like, you know, God is the first mover, for example, that it has to be innate belief in God then? To say you believe is to essentially say that you believe God because God is everything.
Yeah.
As if I've understood your perspective correctly.
Yeah.
But I would say that again, sort of just because you gave these great examples of the Sublime, for example, but that doesn't get rid of this gap of belief, and this might be the impasse that exists, or the gap that exists between us. Because I think that jumping that gap, you know, I'd say that you can't not stress that it's a big gap to jump. To go towards this sort of belief. Like, yes, there are these concepts which might be innately held, but that's neither here or there. I would argue, like, you can talk about. I gave the example when you sort of disproved or applied to that of like murder and conquest. I'd say just because, like, and you brought the studies, for example. Just because the reason I was saying that is just because something might be innately held doesn't necessarily say anything to its credibility or if a higher power exists, for example. Because again, we can't empirically verify that. Now the question is raised: should we empirically verify everything? Realistically. And that is an entirely separate issue.
Sure. So it's very good points that you make. So you're saying just because humans do it, it doesn't mean it's a big jump to make from there to like there's God. But that's what I'm trying to say. And that's where revelation comes in and things like that. So if I'm already, so say for example I'm at a cliff, right? And the conclusion, I'm metaphorically speaking here. So I've made a conclusion leading to this cliff of like, well, I have this feeling there must be something bigger. Okay, where do you go from there now? I mean, there's thousands of like so conceptions of like of God, goddess. But that's one thing that loads of people make a mistake. That yes, there might be this idea that there's 3,000 gods or something like that, Hinduism or something like that, or other religions. But like, who are all of them making claims, and are they all making claims loud enough so that humanity? Because if there is a God, it's a very dynamic tango that we're doing here. So if there is this if there is a God, then that God has to communicate. And then again, going back to marketing, if Nike brings out a shoe and that shoe is sold 500,000 times, Nike was very good at communication, of communicating the idea and the brand and the logistics and how and where to get it and how much it costs, and figuring out how much people would be on mass, critical mass, being able to afford it. And these things are all considered. There's a loads of things that go into consideration. So marketing is a very good example actually to use for this. So if there is a God, and then that God has to communicate. And I feel like, so when people say, well, but there's so many other gods, and how do we know? I say like, well, maybe if you're honest about this concept, if you're very sincere about, well, there's 3,000 gods and I don't know, then you have to go through all 3,000 gods. But I feel like you don't have to, because maybe start with the ones who are the loudest in history. And why these claims? Because, for example, Buddhism, and I was talking to my friend Alex about Buddhism, there's certain things that Buddhism just not claim. Buddhism doesn't claim there's a soul. Buddhism does not claim that there is something. So their claims are slightly different as well, right? But there's certain things that they just don't claim, you know.
Is this in reference to Islam, for example?
Yeah, Islam would claim, for example.
There's correlation.
Yeah, but just before you come back.
Yeah, sorry.
Just before you come back, the point I'm trying to make is that there are so many. There are claims everywhere, but like maybe listen to the loudest ones and what those loudest ones are saying. And I feel like that's what Islam does, and that's what Christianity does, and in Hinduism and all. They claim something, but what is it that they're claiming? And that is sort of my way of looking at. Well, there is something.
If there are universally held beliefs potentially in different camps, then maybe those are the right beliefs.
Yeah, but there is a line of communication, and it keeps coming back and back over and over, and in different time periods, in different languages, political situations. But there's a continuation of an idea.
Well, I would say that that's sort of stemming from. I would argue that that doesn't stem from a religious thing necessarily, or an existence of some deity. I'd say that that stems from cultural attitudes. I mean, if you compare, for example, capitalism versus communism, Karl Marx, I'm not going to try and go too much in depth because I don't know too much about this chap. But I have a rough understanding of communism. I have a pop understanding of communism.
Sure.
I'd say that the ideologies that those two positions hold are very different. Like radically different. Karl Marx wrote. I want to say Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto in London. In what what we could potentially agree to be a capitalist organized society. You know, like the point I'm trying to make is that there is this sort of correlation of these universally held beliefs between different religions, but then again, not always.
Okay.
And I think that making this sort of conclusion from that isn't necessarily the best thing to do. It isn't necessarily the best thing to do.
So I didn't get the whole Karl Marx argument.
So the Karl Marx argument I'm saying is Karl Marx, as far as I know, wrote the Communist Manifesto in a capitalist society. And this ideology holds no capitalistic ideas. Like it might use the language of capitalism, for example. But it isn't in of itself capitalism if you're considering the ideas for abstraction. So you're sort of saying that there are these similar principles existing in these different religions, but I would argue that that is just because of sort of a cultural link that exists between them. But then you could say, okay, there are prophets, therefore these ideas are spread through prophets. It's a game of telephone. Over hundreds of years, they get diluted. You have the Prophet Muhammad, you have Jesus. Both of these figures are arguably well proven to different levels. But then again, I would say that doesn't necessarily prove the idea of a higher power. That it could just be a cultural thing.
But you see, so for example, Karl Marx. Karl Marx really comes from starts off as a young Hegelian, for example. So he is.
Can you explain what Hegelian is?
Hegel.
Okay.
Hegel, the German. So he is a student of Hegel. Not directly, but he sort of
the same school of
thought. And he breaks off that. David Ricardo, English fella who, he's Jewish, I think, and he came to England. He has he influences Karl Marx tremendously, and he's on the other end of the spectrum. And so Karl Marx takes David Ricardo's ideas and runs off and does his own thing. But I understand, granted, I still understand your argument, because you could have brought another example where it really fits well. So I understand your argument, but that's precisely what I'm saying. I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying that if there's a God, then God has been successful in communication. Because over thousands of years, he's been able, or people claim, the same source.
But then why, for example, do you get... I don't know a lot about Islam. As I said this to you earlier. I wish I knew more, and I wish that in the school system in the UK, we would talk more about it. Because I just know about Christianity. But there's, I'm sure you can explain it to me, like Sunni and Shia. That there are different beliefs. So, if I'm understanding your argument correctly, why are these discrepancies in religion existing? To be preemptive in your reply, you could potentially say that these points are misrepresented. that you are not, there's a miscommunication. But then again, I'd say that doesn't again sort of say, why does this natural law not exist? If these ideas are innately held, why do they get diluted? Why does God not sort of correct these things? For example. It's
very good question. Very good question. So there's this idea, and I'm using what I've learned from you today about Occam's razor.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Right. I'm just applying Occam's razor. I'm saying, okay, remove all these other details, whether Shia, Sunni, Protestant, Catholic, remove all of them and just apply Occam's razor. What are they saying? There is a God, there's a hereafter, do good and have hope, do good unto others, live your life righteously, and the kingdom, Jannah, paradise, shall be for you. So that's what I'm saying. That message has been a very persistent message, and it's been communicated extremely well.
Sure.
Extremely well.
I see your point. I'm going to give a bit of a tangential example.
And then, what was the second thing you said?
The second thing kind of was related to...
Oh, the differences.
Yeah.
May I answer to this, or do you want to come back?
Could I come back and then after? Because the reply's in my head.
Okay, come.
There's I cannot remember. I think it's Churchland who came up with this idea, and it's in an entirely different area of philosophy. But essentially, hundreds of years ago, people believed in the existence of caloric fluid. So the idea that this, and again, this is very bad representation, it's not off the top of my head. Essentially, the point of this is that there have been different held scientific beliefs, or different held beliefs over time, which may have been seen as the simplest belief. I would argue that there's also this idea in epistemology of I think it's the coherence of truth, where it's essentially truth is what is held during the time. So you can't expect people to believe in something if the idea isn't even spawned in, right? So if I apply that in the context of what you're saying in terms of Occam's razor, it might seem like the simplest solution right now, but it might not be in 100 years. It might not be in 1,000 years. Which is fair enough. Which again kind of goes back to my original position, where there's this gap. Well, of course, you could reply that I'm applying this on this sort of unfounded level.
No, I think it's a very good point that you make.
But it's like just because it's the most, if it is the simplest solution, that's neither here or there. That's semantics at this point. But it's the simplest solution right now, but it might not necessarily be. If we're considering in terms of evidence, if we look at many different scientific models for various different things, for example, the way the body works, like Descartes, who I agree with a lot of his things. Descartes, in terms of substance dualism, believed that animals were automatons and they did not have minds. Right? Obviously, that's not correct. But that was what he believed at the time. It's been proven over history, regardless if you're religious or not religious, that different models for things appear over time, are disproven again and again and again. And if you apply it to this, you have this either model of sort of being a theist or being an atheist. You don't believe in it. So that's what I replied. Just because the simplest solution is, just because something's simple solution doesn't necessarily mean it's the best.
I totally agree with you. But in terms of the reason why I'm saying all of these things is because if you think about it, how else, if there was a God, how else would you communicate? And if there is a God, why is this communication not good enough? Like that could have been like things that you could have raised. But like, so this is now theology, right? Which I've kind of shied away from. But from a theological point, and loads of people, including Muslims, don't understand this. The whole idea of humanity is in progress. So you raised the point earlier and said, well, why is it that God keeps sending people and people keep forgetting, and why is all of this interruption? Why are there like these differences and things like that? And God says this in the Quran. He says, look, if I wanted to, I would have created you under one religion, under one people. But I intended differences. Now, this is very interesting, because what it's saying is, that And I was talking about 4 weeks to a guy here, a Muslim brother, and he said this to me. I was like, right, this is brilliant. It's just like we are sharpening each other. Like differences that you may have may help me to do something
it's testing your belief.
Testing my. Not only that, but it's also helping me to progress as a human being. For example, perhaps developing empathy towards you, you know, and you are developing tolerance and understanding from. So it's this. So that's this.
I, in terms of that point, I entirely agree.
German.
I that it is a series of testing, sort of intellectual.
Yeah. So there's a German philosopher, Martin Buber. He talks about this encounterings between du und ich. Du und ich means you and I in German. So there is, and Levinas talks about the face as well. So there's an encountering that happens with both of us. And God intended that. He says, I intended the differences so I can see the diversity of humanities, because otherwise, sorry, I'm too animated, but otherwise the whole story of mankind wouldn't have made sense.
Sure.
Like this growing pain that we had, right? This growing pain of progress, this dialectical back and forth progress, belief, wars, differences. All of that makes us better as human beings. You know, it's a bit like, Buddha, he was like this rich prince.
He was the prince, and then he sat up on the tree for a weekend or something.
Yeah, but prior to that, he had never experienced suffering or pain, right? And then he sees like poor people, he leaves his compound, he sees all these poor people on the streets, and that sent him right? And that's precisely what I'm talking about, that God intended it. There is an intention in it. It's not.
There's an intentionality.
Yeah, there's not supposed to be this idea that, and this is now for us who do believe.
Yeah.
It's
that was what I was going to say. It's from this argument, and I'm not invalidating this because I think it's a brilliant argument personally. But you could reply that how do you know that religion or God is not another one of these intellectual tests? That it's just something that's spawned in, but will go away again, if that makes sense. Which is not to be dismissive of these ideas whatsoever.
But that's also. Sorry.
But then you could reply that is in of itself a part of the test.
Yeah.
But then we sort of get to a sort of a difficult impasse where it's like, is it a test? Is it not a test? Blah 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 blah. And it's like, how are you to know? And this is sort of challenging this idea of believing in one thing. How are you to know that it is this one belief? You know, it's like, and ultimately, I believe, because I believe that I believe that if there was only one Muslim in the world, he would still be believing, right? And ultimately, again, it's that sort of gap of belief. It's like, there's this gap between believer and belief.
So, because we can have to wrap up.
Oh, cool.
But just quickly to answer that, again, very theological what you're saying. In Islamic eschatology, there's actually this belief there will come a time when no one is going to believe. That's literally written in our text. We believe that as time progresses, less and less people will believe in God. But then that's, again, it's part of the whole entire
part of the
narrative. And narrative. But hey, Matthew, I really do appreciate talking to you. It's been such a nice conversation. Thank you very much. The mic, maybe? The mic. I'm just going to close off the conversation. Yeah, brother, sister, it was an incredible conversation with Matthew. I really enjoyed him, and I hope that people can really learn from this. It's great. Thank you. So you stopped me because you wanted to be recorded, yeah?
You turned it around.
Yeah, did you not see me?
Oh, was it outside?
But you said let me turn this one.
No, I said I'll check this one.
No, this one. You didn't check. Shall I go get it? Oh.
I finally figured out how to.
But I can show you just go. Huh? Yeah. Yeah, take this.
You have more. change.
Okay. What was the conversation? What did you guys talk about?
About the dunya.
Dunya. Okay, Dunya is this one. And then give him about Rasulullah as well. Wait, Rasulullah.
Just give that.
These are ours. No, none of them.
No, give them to you. We discuss it.
Okay, nice to meet you. What's your name? Hassan Ali. Just want to ask you about firstly, do you have any particular religious beliefs? I'm Muslim. I happen to be. How do you get to that?
Usually stuff strong, but it's
I keep mine.
maybe
You know, identify as being
but I want to finish up the
So versus means, but you can change the name. I'm just filming myself.